Welcome to the Desert Sanctuary with Carl and Laura Forehand.
Often when we have doubts about religion or simply want to ask questions, it can feel like we are wandering out into the desert.
We would like to invite you to join our sanctuary, the Desert Sanctuary.
We've tried to pick guests that would resonate with and challenge us and our fellow seekers here in the desert.
We believe that a key to the journey is to keep asking good questions, and we believe that all stories are sacred.
Our hope is that you will find life and healing for your body and mind, and that you will be able to be where you are and be who you are.
And now, here is our show. Hi, welcome to the Desert Sanctuary podcast. I'm Laura Forehand. I'm here with Carl Forehand, and we are going to just dive right in. We're here to talk about your new book.
Yeah.
Brand new. I mean, you're still working on a couple other books, but this one is called Campfires in the Desert, and it's a deconstruction travel guide.
Mm-hmm.
So, anything you want to say before we dive in?
Yeah, no, just that it's been a while since you and I have recorded, so
Yeah,
it's about
sure.
time that we sit down, but we're going to do this throughout the summer, kind of, and get a bunch of episodes recorded, and then they'll air for the rest of the year. But just more of a deep dive into each of the chapters of that book.
Right, right. So, why did you write this book in the first place? I mean, we've been deconstructing for how long now?
It's probably getting close to 10
Yeah.
years, I would say.
So, and this is the point you felt personally that it was time to write this book. So, why?
Yeah, I think because I saw a lot of my friends and ex-pastors coming out in the desert. At first we talked about, is God a good God and things like that. We deconstructed our thoughts about queer people, LGBTQ. We dealt with racism, anti-racism, and things like that. We did enough to get us where we could move into a more progressive mindset. But I don't think that was ever our goal. And so
No.
we kind of kept going. We tried to go to a progressive church, and there were still things that bothered us. We couldn't figure out why. And pretty soon we realized we had trauma. But too many of the people I see come out and start deconstructing. As soon as they learn something, it's instinctual. As a teacher, you want to share that with others.
Right.
And so you put up a website, and I did this. I wanted to be a coach and then a spiritual director, and then started writing books. And we want to make that kind of into an industry, real quickly. And I think some people do the same thing with coaching.
Oh, for sure.
They learn something, now I can be a coach because I learned that. I don't have 30 years experience and didn't go to college or anything for that. But it's a noble thing to say, I learned something, I want to share it with you. But the thing that people missed in this book, some people didn't want me to write it the way I wrote it, but I wanted to deal with our mental health, with our trauma, with those things that maybe came before religion, but certainly didn't get better.
Right.
Most times in religion. And if we're going to deconstruct, then if we don't settle the issue of the trauma. And several people we know that are trauma people said, don't put that chapter right in the beginning, do it later or something, or be softer about it. But I just see too many of our friends, that still haven't done the hard work.
Right.
And on our other podcast, The Unlearning Curve, Stuart and JD talk about that a lot. You got to do the work. You got to get better.
Right.
And it's hard work. But I wanted this book, if this may be the last nonfiction book I write, because I love writing fiction, but I may figure out a different way to do it in story form, where it's a little different. But for now, this may be my final non-fiction book that kind of tells the story of where we've gone. And I would say that you and I are still making progress. We're still working on this, right?
Right.
We're still working on our healing and so on. But you just started summer vacation, and I think we're we're working on that still, but I'm glad we've done a lot of hard work. And I
Yeah.
wanted to capture that in the book. It's also just a distilled, um, it's just a distilled version of everything we've been learning. I'm kind of squeezing that down into about 15 questions, big questions, and about 15 of these travel guide kind of things. You know, now that you're out here in the desert, let's work on our healing. Let's do the, and so it's meant to represent the many discussions we've had on 400 podcast episodes and not their specific stories, not retelling their stories,
Mm-hmm.
but using that wisdom from all those campfires we've been around with other
Mm-hmm.
people and kind of distilling that into what's most important.
Right.
The last book, Religious Trauma book, started out with "You're going to be okay. It's
Mm-hmm.
okay.
Mm-hmm.
Relax." Um, this one starts out a little more serious, and it's what we're going to talk about today: getting out of survival mode.
Yeah. Before we do, though, I mean, what would you say to, we've heard this before. I don't know if it's a criticism, but, if we've been deconstructing things for 10 years, what do you say to the people? Like, well, when are you going to reconstruct? Don't you think it's time to reconstruct something? Or do you feel like you are slash we are reconstructing something? I don't know. How do you respond to people that are like, well, you can't deconstruct forever?
Yeah, why not?
Yeah,
That's what
right.
I see. But,
Yeah.
you know, I don't want to reconstruct anything from the past,
Mhm.
right? Now, I've always looked at it not as like a demolition. I watch those shows on
Yeah.
TV,
Yeah.
right, where they tear all the insides out of something
Mhm.
and they put it back together.
Right.
Well, I don't want to do that. I don't want to reconstruct something from the old. I want to deconstruct everything that isn't right and pure and helpful and
Hmm.
uh, valuable. And I think it's more like, refining silver or something, that what's left is going to be the real stuff. And I suspect that it's real simple. And I think we're getting there. We've found out how to heal. We're still working on it,
Hmm.
but we've also found out some genuine truths, and and more than anything, a lot of things that don't work. So
Right.
I'm willing to deconstruct as long as it takes. It took
Yeah.
me 50 years to get in this predicament
Hmm.
and to get indoctrinated and not know what I didn't know.
Right.
And so now I think I could spend the rest of my life studying other cultures, studying other beliefs, finding out how to heal, and then move. It's not that we
Hmm.
don't move on
Hmm.
and still pursue other things and get
Hmm.
on down the road,
Hmm.
but we still want to question everything.
I think it's a mentality of just staying open,
Mhm.
right? It's not necessarily that we're like trying to smash things down or, demolish things. It's more that or at least I feel like I'm just staying open to the what ifs of the world because so many times, religion has told you that this is the absolute truth, but in reality, we don't know.
Mhm.
We just don't know. So, one other question before we dive into the first chapter, but you had said something about, like coaching, and, I kind of have, a slightly bad taste in my mouth as far as the word coaching, because I kind of feel like when we try to like monetize that, I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah,
I just struggle with that.
it seems insincere or
Yeah.
something. Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't have all the answers, I mean, I think if you're gonna do coaching, at least stay humble and open to the realization that you don't have all the answers and that you are still learning. Um, but anyway, so how is this book not going to come across as like a coaching manual for people that are deconstructing?
Yeah, it's just, I think, presented from the standpoint of this is what we saw, this is what we thought. I share the same feelings about coaching sometimes, and I'm not saying that people shouldn't be coaches, but sometimes coaches, it's just what we just learned.
Hmm.
And now we're trying to coach somebody else to do it.
Mm-hmm.
We want to we keep condensing, we keep combining and stacking up that knowledge, and we just want to tell you that story.
Mm-hmm.
And it's up to you. I doubt that everyone or anyone's going to totally agree with this book. Um, but I really wanted to stress get better before you start something new,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and at least get a ways down the road on your mental health and self care and the things you need to do while you're deconstructing, so
Right.
that if you do begin to rebuild religious type things, which you may not need to, but if you do, then here's some things that'll help.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think the attitude of the campfire is a lecture,
Mm. It's
right?
a discussion.
It's a
Mm-hmm.
discussion. And the more open, honest dialogue we have together, the better we're going to be.
Yeah.
In other words, we're not saying that we're the coaches
Mm-mm.
of this book. We just want to share what we've heard
Mm-hmm.
around other campfires that we weren't exposed to before.
Right. So diving into the first chapter, it's called Get Out of Survival Mode. And I wanted to share the quote that you start this chapter off with because I really do love it. It says, "You are not lazy, unmotivated, or stuck. After years of living your life in survival mode, you are exhausted. There is a difference." And then tell me the name of the person. Nakia?
Kia Homer.
Nakia Homer. Okay, I want to make sure that I pronounce that name correctly. So I love that because, there were so many years that I really did feel like I'm I'm lazy. Like I'm not praying the right way. I'm
Mhm.
not praying enough. I'm not saying the right words. I was what I felt super unmotivated to like read my Bible, or some days even unmotivated to do church work,
Mhm.
right? Um, and then yeah, that feeling of being stuck, I for sure felt that way because I think we've shared numerous times on this podcast, and I've shared in stories on other podcasts that I did feel stuck. I felt like if I said anything, I could be the one to ruin your ministry.
Yeah.
So, I have felt all those things. So I think that's why I love this quote so much. But when we say getting out of survival mode, first, I think we need to define what is survival mode.
Yeah. So we realized sometime after we've been out in the desert a while, been deconstructing, that we have trauma. And we discovered that, and then we began studying it. Actually, you were studying it,
Hmm.
and I kind of hitched onto that wagon, and we realized there's no clear path in the desert. It's something new. It's what we're discovering. Um, but we experienced a lot of travelers that were wounded, and not too many of them were seriously addressing it. Like I mentioned before,
Hmm.
um, people have told me you're on the right track. You're saying, this stuff you're going to share is the right thing, but they're afraid that we share it in the beginning. I think it's important because people are in survival mode. Our body's stress response gets activated, right,
Hmm.
from various things, and that can be from adverse childhood experience, adverse religious experiences, or the failure of our caregivers or our church or
Hmm.
our schools to effectively care for me,
Hmm.
when I was younger or even later in life. So we don't face the same threats as our ancestors, but our bodies still react to stress uh, similarly.
Right.
And
And there's a whole um, school of thought, school of research around that called
Mhm.
epigenetics or generational trauma.
Mhm.
And so that is a real thing that we need to dive into. I mean, you think about like our religious upbringing. I mean, some of those traditions go back so like five, six, seven generations. I mean,
Yeah.
and so a lot of that trauma was stored in. So I know this sounds strange, but it's like it was stored in um, your mom's body, and if she was pregnant with you at the time, that those things do get passed down from generation to generation.
Hmm. We just heard yesterday that dysregulation, we were listening to another seminar, but dysregulation can be passed from one person to
Hmm.
another. And their example was the teacher and the student,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
A dysregulated parent or a dysregulated teacher cannot regulate a dysregulated child.
Right. Can
That
never
never, yeah,
regulate.
you can't.
Mm-mm.
It just doesn't work that way. But, sometimes when we start getting better, we realize our family may have been weird, and I
Mm-hmm.
hate to say weird because they probably have unprocessed trauma. They
Hmm.
probably have never been to uh, a therapy
Hmm.
session, or
And
things
some
like
of that is generational because
that.
there's a shame around, asking for help.
Yeah, I was going to say we were encouraged by religion to push forward,
Hmm.
right? We ignore the warning signs. God has a purpose for me. God's going to reveal it to me. It doesn't matter if I don't feel right about it. But we viewed everyone outside of us as other. And when I think of survival mode, I think of the deer that I used to hunt
Hmm.
and would see them. They're just constantly looking around. They're
Hyper
constantly
vigilant.
hyper vigilant,
Hmm.
which is where we use now. We viewed everyone as other and they were threats. And so we hide away in our churches where it's predictable. We know what's going to happen every week. We're going to get triggered a little bit and they're going to regulate us. And then we'll leave and go home and come back again next week. So we hide away at church and we're encouraged to be doers of the
Hmm.
word, not just hearers only. So do, 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 do. It's all for the Lord. And then when it doesn't work, then it's our fault.
Right.
If it happens to work, then all praise and glory goes to God. That
Hmm.
that is a trauma. Not only does it ignore our trauma, but it
Hmm.
also tends to kind of pile on,
Hmm.
right?
Right.
So and most of us are in survival mode, and we got to learn how to get out of that.
Hmm. Yep. So how do we even recognize we are in survival mode or having a trauma response? So I was thinking about this yesterday as I was kind of getting ready for this. It's like, how did I even know like what I was experiencing was a trauma response? I mean, I think for me, now that I'm talking about this out loud, I think for me it was I had to separate myself from uh the institute of the institution of the church, right? I had to
Mhm.
separate myself from all the religious doctrine I was hearing and all the things I was doing, as you were
Mhm.
just saying.
Yeah.
And, you know, then it was like my body started regulating when I didn't put myself in those situations.
Yeah.
And so, but yeah, how do we get to that point? I mean, because sometimes it's hard to go, I think I'm going to just, when you're in that survival state, you are in like the brain stem, right? You're in the lower part of your brain. So
Mhm.
you're not reasoning, you're not thinking logically. I mean, that's just science.
Yeah.
And so,
If we don't deal with it effectively, we just move from crisis to crisis and outburst to outburst
mhm,
and fight to another fight
mhm,
to making up to another fight. I think there are physiological effects that it has on us, notice and things we can notice when we're under stress. I always look at my dog Winston, our dog Winston, and see him when the mail lady comes. He just starts to shake. He's dysregulated,
mhm.
right? He's shaking. He's growling. Sometimes he barks. Sometimes he jumps against the window. But he is activated,
Yeah,
right?
he's in fight mode.
Yeah,
He's in, if we had to compare it to the human brain, he's in his brain stem.
yeah.
His amygdala is activated and
Active.
he's ready to fight.
And
Yeah.
whatever cortex he has as a dog, I'm sure it's pretty small, but it's not engaged. It's what we
Mhm.
call
It's offline.
flipping your lid,
Mhm.
right? He's offline and he's just fight, flight, fight or freeze, right?
Mhm.
I think I said two words: fight, flight, freeze, or fawn.
Right.
And he's been activated, and it's like, what would happen? We're going to Colorado in July,
Hmm.
right? And what happens if a bear comes out and stands in front of me and growls at me and stands up? What do I do? And so trauma is like that. It's
Mm-hmm.
all of a sudden there's a big bear in the room,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe it's a husband and wife having a fight over nothing. And then, both of us are activated in
Mm-hmm.
trauma mode. Our heart rates go up, our blood pressure goes up, and we enter into one of those states. And it's just like we're in the presence of a dangerous animal. Even,
Right.
even though we don't live outside anymore, even though we don't live on the prairie, or anything like that, we're relatively safe, but everything seems like an emergency.
Well, your brain cannot distinguish when you're in that survival mode. It can't distinguish from what is a real threat to what is a perceived threat. It all feels real.
Yeah,
It all feels real.
exactly.
Hmm. Yeah. So I guess, what would be some of the advice maybe you would give to help people recognize that they are in a survival state, or they're having a trauma response to something? I mean, what do we need to do? Like for me, it was I had to take a step back. I didn't know that's what I needed to do when we did take a step back. Um, but like, do you have any tips that would, like, how do we get to that point where we recognize, okay, like, I'm not feeling safe in this situation.
Yeah, I would think one thing we got to do is realize we got to get out of this survival mode, right? It's not that we're tired, like the quote you read,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's not that we're tired. It's just that we've been at this too long, and
Mm-hmm.
we got to do something about it. Realize we have trauma from the past. We weren't cared for well, or we had chronic stress from our workplace, or religion even failed to solve the problem. Also, maybe have piled on
Mm-hmm.
also. And so, getting out of survival mode, I think some things that helped us were, and this was led by you because you've been studying it for your work at school,
Mm-hmm.
is get a basic understanding of the brain. You
Mm-hmm.
mentioned a part of the brain just in a few statements back. Realize that we have kind of three main parts of the brain. That's the ones we like with Seeger, is that the
Mm-hmm.
guy?
Dan
Dan,
Siegel.
Dan Siegel. I
Mhm.
was close.
Yeah, you're
I
close.
think I mixed it up with my Bob Seger
Yeah, maybe.
that I like to listen to music wise. But get a basic understanding of the brain. The brain stem, the first part that developed, is a basic root part of our brain that just reacts. The mammalian, that's called the reptilian
Mm-hmm.
brain, the primitive survival mode thing, but also the mammalian brain, our limbic system, that contains our limbic system and the amygdala, the
Mm-hmm.
hippocampus, and those kind of things that maintain the balance in our body. So
Mm-hmm.
when we're dysregulated, when we're feeling that trauma, we dysregulate. We're not in homeostasis. We're not in balance. We're out of balance.
Right.
So that part of our brain is activated in the neocortex, the last part of the brain, the higher brain, the thinking brain,
Mm-hmm.
the front brain, whatever you want to call it. It's responsible for our advanced cognitive function. So we say we're flipping our lid because the thinking brain kind of goes offline when it
Mm-hmm.
thinks it's in survival mode,
Right.
right? And that can happen from little tiny things where you're getting that. But once you understand how the brain works, you know what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can pause, and say, I'm activated here, my blood pressure's up.
Mm-hmm.
As I'm helping out with the kid, I hope this doesn't sound like, I'm bragging about helping someone, but first thing I did was put an oximeter on his hand and
Mm-hmm.
showed him how, you're a little nervous right now, your heart rate's up.
Mm-hmm.
And it's good to be aware. But I think that awareness is not the only thing.
I do think, though, that, you know, if you feel like you're feeling flush, or you feel hot, or like being in tune with how you feel,
Your body. Yeah.
and just not um shaming or condemning yourself for that. There's a reason, like, your nervous system is speaking to you.
Hmm.
It is trying to tell you something. So when you have those feelings of my heart is racing, um, I feel hot. I feel like I'm crawling out of my skin. It's
Right.
you need to like take a step back, take yourself out of the situation. So like for me, that all those things were happening inside of a church building. So when I took myself out and gave myself permission to be okay with, this was my nervous system communicating to me what was going on, then you're in a state more of that, like you said, homeostasis or a regulated state. And then you can, ask yourself those questions like what, like I wonder why I'm having this physiological reaction to this.
Mhm.
And that allows you to dig a little deeper into, maybe it was your upbringing in church. Maybe it was just your upbringing. Maybe, who knows what it might have been. But I do feel like, yeah, as long as you're in that lower brain state, that survival state of your brain, your prefrontal cortex or some people call it the upstairs brain. Downstairs brain would be your brain stem. Upstairs brain would be your cortex, where all your reasoning happens. But as long as you are in survival mode, your prefrontal cortex, your upstairs brain, is offline. Like you cannot reason. So you do have to find ways to regulate yourself. But listening to your nervous system and what it is, like what are your physiological symptoms that your nervous system is talking to
Yeah.
you.
Some of the people we interviewed, especially survivors of abuse and religious abuse and other types of abuse, would say, then I go into a room and I immediately get activated. And they talked about getting small. You're hyper vigilant, you're
Mm-hmm.
reading the room, right? And then there's just anxiety, there's things that are going on just because you go into a room full of people, right?
Right.
And so those regulating techniques, it's interesting when we had Jack, our grandson, over and he breathed out. And I
Mm-hmm.
remember you saying, um, it's okay, it's good to take a breath,
Yeah.
and he just kind of regulated himself by
Mm-hmm.
taking a big breath and blowing it out.
It's that
It's
sighing.
an audible sigh, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, I like to think Winston does that eventually,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and he forgets about the whole thing and doesn't
Right.
carry that trauma like we do.
Mm-hmm.
Animals are pretty good at shaking off their trauma. They
Mm-hmm.
literally shake sometimes. So those we've gotten used to those regulating techniques, and around the house, I need a second. I need to
Yeah.
breathe,
Mm-hmm.
and we breathe out. But I wanted to say though that regulating techniques help us right now, and it's important. Like with you as students, or with us and people in churches, to co-regulate, to help each other,
Mm-hmm.
give each other time to regulate. But then after, regulation, what if we would heal a little deeper? What if we could heal that trauma or integrate it,
Mm-hmm.
with our nervous system? So we've experienced some somatic healing,
Mm-hmm.
different things like that, where we eventually can respond instead of react.
Right.
Still have triggers, but we get a lot better at handling them when we make that mind body
Mm-hmm.
connection.
So you in one of your subtopics, which was in chapter one, getting out of survival mode, you talk about finding empathetic companions, and I've heard you
Mm-hmm.
say empathetic witnesses before. So can you talk about this? Because I think it's important um, when you're trying to find that person that is a safe person to
Yeah.
kind of co-regulate with. What do you mean by empathetic companions?
Yeah. So I learned that, and I don't remember the exact word they used, but in when I did the spiritual direction training with the Benedictine sisters, they were the first to teach me that. And when you would talk to them about what you feel,
Mm-hmm.
which the church generally doesn't prompt us to do that, they kind of warn against it. Don't go inside, don't trust your feelings, and so on. But when we do, if you and I were talking and you say, a part of me feels, and you feel anger, you feel sadness,
Mm-hmm.
whatever you feel, when you feel that, you need someone to be with you.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so when they're with you, they have empathy for you. They think, me too, but
Mm-hmm.
they don't give you advice. They don't interrupt you. They just listen.
Mm-hmm.
And then might ask you, how do you feel? Where do you feel it?
Mm-hmm.
And then they allow you to feel it. I was in a group that was working on this, and I said, I'm a little nervous because um, I'm the only guy in this room. We're not allowed to feel.
Right.
And one of the participants kind of jumped in to rescue me, like,
Mm.
oh, that's not, you shouldn't think that because,
Right.
and the moderator
Well, when you
kind of
say
said,
you shouldn't think that, I don't know about you, but it automatically like makes me feel shame.
yeah, and she was trying to rescue me. And
Right.
the moderator kind of said, wait a minute, don't rescue Carl.
Mm-hmm.
Let him feel this
Mm-hmm.
and let him process, and be with it. And that empathetic witness will help you do that
Mm-hmm.
because they just shake their head and might groan a little bit like, yeah. And they, they're helping you validate what you're feeling without giving you advice, without having to fix you,
Mm-hmm.
without giving you a Bible verse or,
Yeah.
a catchphrase,
Right.
or something that make you bypass.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to bypass that. There's a reason you're feeling that is because your body's trying to say, hey, this is an unresolved thing.
Mm-hmm.
When you're 5 years old, something happened.
Mm-hmm.
And whether you understand all the psychological reasoning for that and why it affected you, if you could be with it
Mm-hmm.
and listen,
Mm-hmm.
then sometimes we've noticed that when we've done that with other people, we almost kind of feel what they're feeling. And I think that's true empathy. And I think empathy is a good thing.
Mm-hmm. Right. So, we've talked about the parts of the brain. We've talked about what survival mode is and kind of where we sit in our brain and when we're in survival mode. But, how do we so we've recognized these things, we've done these things, right? We recognize that there's some sort of trauma. Um and something I want to say about trauma too, and I know we've said this on previous podcasts before, but it's really easy to shame yourself out of thinking that your trauma is not, well, it's not as bad as so and so.
Right.
Well, at least I didn't. We have to work at getting those kind of that kind of vocabulary and those kind of thoughts out of our um, self-talk, if you
Mm-hmm.
will, because I know that was really helpful for me on my journey and continues to be on my journey of healing because yeah, what is traumatic or causes my body to go into fight or flight mode may seem insignificant to you, right? But it's all real, it's all important. So learning not to, tell yourself like that bypassing. We can find people that will bypass our trauma, but we can also do that as well. We
Yeah.
can definitely have that self-talk where we bypass our own trauma. I used to say this to myself all the time. Why can't you just get over it? Why?
Yeah. You're
Well, the
50
reason
years
you can't
old. You
get
haven't got
over
over
it,
it. Yeah.
the reason I couldn't get over it is because I wouldn't deal with it.
Right.
I would just shame myself and then stuff it
I
back
shouldn't be
down.
feeling this. I'm too
Right.
old. I should have
Yeah.
got through this by now.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
we've talked about all those things, regulating techniques, etc. But how do we heal our trauma? I mean, that's the big question, and maybe it's not one we can answer right now. I don't know, but how, you have a part in the book where it talks about healing our trauma. So how do we at least begin to heal our trauma?
Yes. What I was talking about with the Benedictine sisters is part of it. We call it somatic therapies, and it's different names, but you call it inner child work, shadow work, somatic healing. Peter Levine calls it inner healing. I can't remember what he calls it, but Amy Appian, Dr.
Hmm.
Amy
Hmm.
says she calls it parts work.
Hmm.
Different people have different names for it, but it's kind of generally called somatic healing. And basically, it's it's paying attention to what we feel.
Mm-hmm.
Why, this is coming up. The question to ask is not really why is it coming up?
Mm-hmm.
The question to ask is what is it?
Mm-hmm.
And to be with it. And nowadays I understand that to be Eugene Genlin, who developed a method I like called focusing, said it's a murky place,
Uh-huh.
where you get to, well, I'm feeling sad, and through meditation, I might have got rid of all the things I was thinking about, my laundry list and all those things I got to do. I finally got down to that one thing that seems to be speaking to me, and it's really murky and
Mm-hmm.
it's hard to process with your cognitive brain. But when you feel it, then you can heal it.
Mm-hmm.
And we call that integration.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a magic cure. You don't just pray, God, take this away. It doesn't seem to work that way.
Mm-hmm.
And I was a pastor for 20 years, been a Christian a long time. And now that I'm not, um, I would say the best thing we can do is just be with it.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah, I heard something on our conference, our Zoom conference yesterday. What is shareable is bearable. And then I've also heard what you can name, you can tame.
Mm.
So, and again, that just goes back to being able to name those things, but not slapping a shame label on it. Like, well,
Right.
at least it's, I don't know what I have to be so upset about. It's not as bad as so and so, we have to take that language out in order to really deal with um, the trauma
Yeah.
and heal it.
And my response to most things is fight.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I find myself fighting with someone online because they disagreed with me.
Mm,
And that seems sometimes really urgent and really, like I'm facing a bear. And so I'm going to fight.
mm-hmm.
Um, Once we start doing some of that work, and we do have a trauma informed therapist also.
Mm-hmm.
And what she will do is say, let's check in with your body.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm telling a story or telling her about something that happened or what I'm going through. Let's check in with our bodies.
Mm-hmm.
And when you do that, you have a chance of, in the future, responding to triggers instead of reacting
Mm-hmm.
to them. And, for me, fighting, for you, something else, right?
Mm-hmm.
You handle it a different way.
Right.
Um, but on the unlearning curve, our other podcast, JD and Stuart talk a lot, uh, almost every time we record, about doing the hard work
Mm-hmm.
and doing what most people don't do, so you'll have what most people don't have.
Mm-hmm.
And I would equate that to peace, that I don't feel overwhelmed by everything. I don't feel like I'm facing a bear every day.
Mm-hmm.
But more at peace, more able to go on the journey and just let it be what it is.
Mm-hmm. And that's not to say that like every day is like rainbows and sunshine. I mean,
Right.
things come up and we still get triggered. I'll speak for myself. I still get triggered. I still have that internal dialogue that is not the healthiest to have. And yeah, so, but having some of the techniques that you talk about in your book, having those at the ready and recognizing, okay, right now I'm in survival mode. Right now I'm in the brain stem, the reptilian brain. I need to like just go outside and sit on the porch and breathe
Mm-hmm.
and look at nature and regulate myself in order to really put what's happening into realistic perspective for me.
Mm-hmm.
Because yeah, when I'm in my brainstem, I mean, I will spiral faster than anything. And then
Mm-hmm.
it's not good for anyone. It's not good for me. It's not good for our relationship. It's not good. Yeah, it's just not good for anything.
Yeah, just be sure. There's no way around it. You can't say, "Whoa, this is my PTSD or this is my whatever." You can't. That's not going to work when you're dysregulated.
Mm-hmm.
What you have to do when you're dysregulated, when you're visiting the past and it brings up anxiety or anger or sadness, then you have to acknowledge it. You
Mm-hmm.
have to acknowledge this is what I feel,
Mm-hmm.
not this is what I think.
Mm-hmm.
And you talk about neuroplasticity sometimes,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Can you explain that? Because it is possible to rewire
Oh
our
yeah,
brains,
for
right?
sure. I mean, and I think that doing the work enables you to do that.
Mm-hmm.
I loved Dr. Lori Desautels. She talks a lot about neuroplasticity, and she even showed a video yesterday during our Zoom conference about how, just we can rewire those neural pathways, and just by things like having that empathetic witness, um, having that more positive self-talk, taking time to be in nature to regulate that that transforms your brain.
Mm-hmm.
And I really, before, 10 years ago, I would have never thought, I would have thought I'm just going to be like this forever, this is just how I am, and um I've absolutely seen that, with your stroke, just thinking about 3.5 years ago, you couldn't do anything with the left side of your body, and
Mm-hmm.
and now you have done physical therapy, occupational therapy. They even talked about, I remember this at Ability KC and at Smithville, where you were before Ability KC, but they were like, you have to visualize that side of your body moving.
Mm-hmm.
Like, even if it won't move, you have to visualize, your fingers pinching together and your arm moving up and down. And yeah, so we can transform,
Mm-hmm.
our minds. And I don't mean that in a spiritual, biblical sense. I'm just
Right.
like, the truth is, the science is out there. We can retrain our brains, we can rewire those neural pathways, for healing instead of
Mm-hmm.
harm.
Yeah. So I would find a trauma informed counselor
Hmm.
that or therapist. There's various things that work like EMDR and things like that, but
Hmm.
somatic therapies that connect your mind and your body.
Hmm.
And not just that we learn about the different ailments and things we could be inflicted by, but to feel it. And when
Hmm.
we fire together, or when we, I don't remember what the quote is, but being with each other and doing the hard work.
Hmm. Yeah. And just, remember that your nervous system is actually there to help you. It is trying to communicate with you. And
Yeah.
I just think that is like pretty amazing. And whether you want to give, God the credit for, instilling that in you, or just, you just need that as reassurance, just know, like, your nervous system is amazing and it is communicating with you. It's time that we just stop,
Hmm.
you know, and listen. Go touch grass and listen to what your nervous system is trying to communicate with you. That's the pathway
You
to
may
healing.
have to get away from your trauma, like we're going to talk about next time.
Hmm.
Um,
That's what I had to do.
yeah, we just had to remove ourselves from that and
Hmm.
begin the hard work of doing
Right.
that. So,
Right. So this has been a really great conversation, and we've only started with chapter one. So we just want to remind the listeners that this book is called Campfires in the Desert. It's a deconstruction travel guide. And I like the fact that you said guide, because these are things that have worked for us. Um, they may work for you. You may put your own spin on things. So yeah, check it out. You can purchase the book on Amazon, probably wherever
yeah,
books are sold. But the Kindle version is 99 cents. The audiobook is 5.99, but I have an Audible subscription, and I went on yesterday and it gave it to me for free. So,
yeah. You didn't even think you had any
I didn't have any credits.
credits. Yeah.
So, sometimes that might work for you, but I mean, 99 cents is is a deal. It's a
Yeah.
deal. And even at $5.99, the audiobook, like I like to listen to audiobooks, but I actually have the hard copy in front of me too. So I'm kind of like taking notes and underlining things, which is really helpful for me. So we just want to encourage you guys to check out the book. The one thing I like about the book is that it has questions at the end.
It does. After every chapter, and then in the second part, after the questions, it has questions about questions. So
Mhm.
there's some place, some white space for you to write in
Yeah.
and think about it and
Journal.
process through it.
Journaling is a great way to regulate too.
Yeah.
So maybe like listening or reading parts of this book may be a little triggering. I don't know. But, having that at the end of the book can definitely help, you think about what your nervous system is telling you and to regulate those thoughts rather than staying in your brainstem.
Yeah. For the listeners, we want to remind you, as always, to be where you are, be who you are, and be at peace.
Thank you for joining us today on the Desert Sanctuary podcast.
Remember, all who wander in the desert are not lost.
We believe all of our stories are sacred.
We are always here if you need someone to hear your story.
Check out our blog on Pathos and also our YouTube channel.
And stay tuned for our Leaning Forward conference.
Remember, we love you.
And be at peace.